and welcome to the first episode of Deuce. I'm Julie Snook, and joining me on the leather couch is Adam Peacock.
Is it leather?
I don't know what it is. It's back in time is what it is.
It's comfortable, and that's the main thing.
It's comfortable. Welcome to the clubhouse.
It's great to be in the clubhouse, and welcome to you in the clubhouse as well.
Thank you. I was waiting for that.
This is going to be a bit of fun because tennis, we both love.
Mm-hmm.
I've worked on it a bit. You're a long-time observer of the sport and lover of the sport. So we're just going to come at it from a not entirely different angle, but just have relaxed chats and get some old stories and some current opinions about where the sport's at and where it's going and where it's been.
And there are some stories, and there are certainly some opinions.
Yeah, exactly. Hard not to have an opinion about it. And tennis is very much a personality sport. So lots, not so much based on their ability and their technical ability. It's, I don't like that person because of the way they behave, for instance.
Yes.
But so there's so many great stories, and this is our treasure chest that we've got those stories, and we're going to draw them out of our guests each and every week.
We're going to give the fan's eye view of tennis. We're going to take you behind the scenes and behind the characters, because there are so many characters. And of course, this wouldn't be possible without our mates at the Fanatics. You're a Fanatic, mate, yourself?
I have been on a Fanatics tour.
Yeah.
Can't say it was at a World Cup. It was a football event.
Yeah.
Can't say I remember all of it,
Okay.
but I do know I had a great time. So that was back in Russia. I don't think we'll be back there anytime
No.
soon. But the Fanatics, yeah, they've been around. It started late 90s, and they went to all those great Davis Cup ties, which we're going to touch on in our first episode as well with our special guest. But yeah, you'll have a good time. If you get on board with the Fanatics and you travel somewhere in the world to see a sporting event or a cultural event, you'll have a good time.
Fanatics is the Aussie sporting fans and international party people organising events and merchandise for passionate Aussie sporting fans. If you'd like to find out what's next, you can visit thefanatics.com. You can also visit us, find us on social media at Instagram and Facebook at The Fanatics, YouTube as well, Fanatics TV, anywhere you get your good podcast from. AP, we have a lot of fun ahead of us.
We do, absolutely. Davis Cup week, of course. I'm not the biggest fan of Davis Cup not being best of five and being home ties, but that's the way of the world. A few years ago, it was sold off. How I had it put to me is the ITF sold the farm off to international investors. It's based in Spain now. It's just this, like it's a 4-day event now. They've even brought it into a narrower part of the calendar. We've just had the Billie Jean King Cup in the same place in Malaga, and now we've got the Davis Cup Australia. Now it's just straight knockout. 8 teams, straight knockout. One like 2 singles, 1 doubles, 3 sets every match. So it's not what it once was, best of 5 over 3 days. But Australia play USA first up. But it's all about the retiring Rafael Nadal. No doubt you're sad to see him go. This is going to be his last ever event. The whole staging of the whole thing is all about Rafa, which is fair enough. You've got Carlos Alcaraz there. You've got Yannick Sinner there playing for Italy. But it's all about Rafa.
What a giant he has been. And one of the big 4, the big 3, which we're going to touch on in this episode with our first guest. Give us a little tease. Why did you want this guest to join us here in the clubhouse?
Well, it's a good way to start because I know the guy very, very well. I know what he's about. I know how he thinks. I know how he navigates life. And he's a very interesting character. So he's not your prototypical live in a tennis bubble and not know anything about life. He's a learned human, our first guest. So, looking forward to quizzing him about his life in tennis.
A learned human. What a lovely way to introduce our first guest here at the clubhouse on Deuce. Well, it is wonderful to have our first guest here in the clubhouse. Joining us today is Ian Wally Masur. Welcome, sir.
Who's that?
It's you.
Yes, Ian Walter. Mum wanted Ian. She got that on the birth certificate. Dad wanted Walter. He was European. He won out in the end. He refused to call me Ian. Walter, when you get to school, becomes Wally. Here I am.
Jules, I've known this guy for, 20 years or so, but it took me about 10 years in to look down at a boarding pass one day and go, Ian? Who's Ian? You just do not look like an Ian.
No,
you're a Wally.
Thank you. I feel like one.
You're very much a Wally. You're not an Ian.
Yes.
Like, does that surprise? Do people get on the back foot when they find out that it's actually Ian Masur?
Well, I didn't actually find out that Ian was my name until I was 14 because we went overseas, back to Europe I went over with Mum and Dad, and I got a passport. But the passport I got was British. So I learnt two things about myself, that I was born in England, which I didn't know at 14, and
Wow.
my name was Ian. So
your
There you
family
go.
didn't mention that any Christmases
no,
prior?
they didn't, they sort of played their cards close to their chest.
No rush to tell you these details.
I don't know what went on back then, but anyway.
Fantastic.
Well, it's lovely to see you. Thank you for joining us. What do you make of our new clubhouse, our new surrounds?
Look, I really like it. We have discussed this off air. It's Antiques Roadshow, Don Bradman's trunk from the Invincibles tour,
my champagne collection.
a Louis XIV
AP.
settee.
Yes.
It's
AP's
fantastic.
brought in L. Good on you. What a
L
contribution.
as well.
Mm.
And I've got a little birdie friend to keep an eye on you up there, Wal.
Oh, my daughter has one of those just outside her window, and it's eating her window frame. So
Yeah.
I
Careful.
don't think we're at risk of that one eating any frames.
no, he seems very still.
He seems
very
very
calm.
still.
Yeah.
So it's lovely to have you here in the clubhouse. Tell us, what are you up to these days? What are you doing with yourself?
Semi-retired, which at my age I think is the right thing to do. I had been the performance coach for tennis. Performance coach. I was head of performance for Tennis Australia for about 5 or 6 years prior to COVID. Everybody hit the pause button when COVID hit, obviously, and there was no tennis, no travel. We weren't sending staff overseas, and it gave me a chance to hit pause. And our local government area was Manly to Palm Beach. It wasn't so bad. And I thought, I don't actually mind this. It suits me because I'm quite lazy by nature. And since then, since we came out of COVID, I'm still working for TA. I do some media for TA, do some commentary, particularly over the summer, and still involved with their performance program, but just on the periphery, do a couple of days a week here and there.
So with the coaching side of it, like you do the media, you're very good at that, good co-commentator, taught me a lot about the game, taught a lot of people who watch.
Took Peacock under my wing,
Yes.
mentored him.
And this is where I've landed. So there you go. On a Louis
Weird.
XIV
We've all
couch.
landed here together.
He actually had a bright future, and then he started working with me at Fox, and now look at him. It's been
look,
downhill ever
it's-
since.
It's actually turning the colour of his beard
Did
as
you
well.
say, is there a nickname that you call him?
Well, just the Peacock
The Peacock.
is a nickname in itself.
It is. It's a great name.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Call me anything.
Sorry. Go on.
Where were we? Yeah, so you could go into commentary full time and go into other areas of public speaking, but you still insist on hopping in the car a couple of days a week and going out, sometimes in 35-degree heat, 112% humidity, and hit with a 12, 14-year-old developing player just to see what you can do there. That's obviously not because you have to do it, it's because you want to do it.
Yeah.
So why?
Yeah, well, I suppose I was involved, prior to that head of performance role, I was involved in an academy. So Craig Tiley, who's the CEO of Tennis Australia and the tournament director of the Australian Open, when he came to Australia as head of performance, he set up academies in each major city. And I think it was pretty pivotal, to be honest. I think it was a bit of a turning point in Australian tennis because we had Leighton, we had Pat, we had Philippoussis, Stosur. We had these marquee players, these Grand Slam winners, but there wasn't a lot of depth below that. And, they were telling a story, but it was sort of hiding, a lack of depth in our talent pool. Craig set up the academies, and I think they were very beneficial. They were costly, no doubt about that. But I had the opportunity to work there, and I had been involved with the Davis Cup as a coach. And that's a very different role. That's more, it's more man management.
We'll get to some stories
as
well.
But, I was actually on court with players. And, when you're an ex-player, you're actually not a great technical coach. You see things that just look awful, but you don't know how to go A, B, C, D, E to fix it. But we had some coaches out there that were great biomechanical technical coaches. Ben Pine, Jared Bunt. I worked with Sandon Stolly, Michael Tebbett, former players. So it was a really good crew of coaches and people. And I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the camaraderie, which you get on the tour. I enjoyed learning how to coach from a technical level. And just learning about the journey of trying to help younger players. I think my sweet spot is actually helping players who just come out of juniors and making that transition to seniors. That's a really tough 3 or 4 year period for most players. And I just enjoy it. I just enjoy players that are open to suggestion, that want to work hard, and they're good kids.
So why is that window so pivotal to players?
It's just night and day, from junior tennis to senior tennis. And some players who are prodigies, your Ash Bardys, Nick Kyrgios, Leighton, some players are just so good, they just make, Alex Diminar to a degree, they just make that step very easily. But for a lot of players, it's pretty brutal, particularly the second year syndrome when the tour sort of works you out. You've got to catch up. You got to catch up in miles in the legs. You're playing Rafa, you're playing Novak, you're playing better players week in, week out. They destroy your confidence. There's a lot of work to be done in those years, say 18 to 22, which will then set you up for your best tennis sort of 25, 28, 30.
Because you're also developing physically as well as mentally.
Absolutely. I mean, you look at I love rugby league. I love watching rugby league. And, back in the day, in the 80s, the game, there's a technical ability and skill and seeing the game and reading the game. And then there's the physicality of the game. Now, in tennis and in rugby league, that physicality is just gone through the roof. And the athletes are so much bigger, faster, stronger. So when you get a young kid who's got ability, it's a bit like boxing. You've almost got to nurse them through, the next stages because you've got to catch up. You've got to get those miles in your legs and you've got to get that physicality to match the tour week in, week out.
Yeah, you've always said as well that those guys that you had in, you got your special generational talents, natural talent, all of that. But then the guys who and girls who kind of need time to develop, you're trying to build something which is not just going to give them a great moment here and there. It's like set up a career so that they can retire and go, geez, I got the most out of that. And that's not an easy thing to do because everyone wants everything yesterday.
That's right. No regrets. And quite often it's not even the players that want everything yesterday. It's all the people around them, unfortunately.
Parents would be fun to deal with.
Yeah, that's right. And then, the best way is a straight line from A to B, but people sort of zigzag and, they waste time and they waste years. But I guess I just enjoy that period in a player's journey. And the prodigies, they're not that much fun because they're usually very stubborn. They do things their way. And that's great. That's that's one of their great strengths. But I sort of enjoy the player who I know is going to have a tough 3 or 4 years, but they're willing to work at it. And then you try to put things in place that you know, because you've been through the journey, are going to hold them in good stead in future years. But you got to convince them that you're going to take some horrible beatings, but you can't throw everything that you're working on out the window just to get one result. You've got to get better at what you do and what your strengths are and matching your personality to your game style so that your best tennis is here. I don't worry about a player's blue sky. That takes care of itself. I worry about their worst game because if your worst game sucks, you won't have a career. So you've got to get your worst game very close to your best game. And I like working on the worst game.
Told you he was an oracle.
Oh, my goodness.
Very philosophical and...
Sounds torturous, though.
Yeah. I've never had any success, but that's my philosophy, yeah.
See, you should see when you tap into it as well, he starts like quoting Camus and things like that. And it gets deep quick.
Where did your love of this sport come from then?
I like sport. I love sport. My dad was European. I started skiing at the age of 5. Dad played golf. He introduced me to golf, tennis. Played a lot of soccer as a kid. Just like sport. I guess I probably had ADHD as a kid. Couldn't sit still. So, but what I like about tennis is it's you. Every hit, everything's you. Every day, every moment of every day is you. I would play soccer and we'd win. And I wouldn't score and I'd be cranky. We'd lose. I'd play well. I'd be cranky. Because it's not all about you. So I guess I'm an only child, extremely selfish. Tennis seemed to...
There are other only children in the room, and we're not all that way.
No, but I just enjoyed that element of the sport. It was kind of down to you.
Yeah. But does that make it almost even more challenging? Because you don't have your teammates to lean on. It is all you out there. And a lot of it's mental too, we've seen with a lot of the players.
Yeah, I think it was a good time, actually. I really enjoyed the era in which I played. It obviously not as professional as it is now.
The 50s?
Yeah, the 40s and 50s, that's right, coming out of the war. But it was a great time on the tour because no one could really afford a coach. Girlfriends didn't travel, wives didn't travel. So it was just kind of the boys out on the road. You relied on your doubles partner or your friends. If you're struggling on court, you would set up drills that would suit you. You'd do the same for them when the time was right. You had a 9 o'clock qualifying match indoors at Rotterdam. Your doubles partner get up at 7 and warm you up. You do the same for him. There was good camaraderie. You might have a night out on the beers and then your mate would knock on the door and say, we're going for a run. We're going to run that out. It was just a good time on tour. And those people that I played with and against and played Davis Cup with and against, they've remained my great mates throughout life.
So on Davis Cup, let's get to that right now. It was obviously a big part of you. You say they're individual sport. You wanted that individual nature, but you, like a lot of Australians of that era, just lapped up the team environment. Playing Davis Cup through the 80s, had great success there. Australia won it a few times, some of the great moments. You got involved with coaching and being a part of the Davis Cup team for nearly 20 years there. But what right now, and this is Davis Cup week, it's final week in Malaga. What do you make of what's become of the Davis Cup?
Yeah, it's sad, really, because Davis Cup, the whole home and away format was absolutely massive. You know, I go back to, I was on the periphery of the team in the early 80s, you know, when Australia played Sweden at Kuyong all those years ago in the early 80s, and Pat Cash did amazing things. And, you know, I got a chance to have a 10-year Davis Cup career and then, as you say, get involved with the coaching end of it. And so many great things come to my mind with that whole home and away setup. You know, Leighton Hewitt beating Gustavo Kuerten in Brazil. You know, Pat Cash just losing the final of the Australian Open to Mats Wilander. Then we flew to Mexico City and he was like a giant. You know, he played an incredible 2 matches on clay directly after contesting that final, which was pretty disappointing for him at Mexico City at 8,000 feet. Really difficult times, and just, you know, so many good memories. And obviously when you go to South America, the crowds are pretty raucous. You know, I played a match in Peru and they were throwing coins at me, and you know, you're copping coins in the face and sort of looking at your captain saying, is this okay? And he's going, just keep your head down, let's get out of here alive. Because that particular tie was threatened by the Shining Path guerrilla movement.
What?
Yeah.
What?
Well, they were a communist sort of militia.
Yeah.
Who were probably on the right side of social justice, given the inequity in Peru, but they had threatened to disrupt the tie, and they were serious. So we all had guards, police guards, to drive to the courts when we practiced. And Fitz and I were in the car one day, and, you know, we were being smart asses. We said, so what are you packing? And the guy pulled out his pistol and he was sort of telling us this is this and this is that, and it's tough in Peru and times are tough and the economy's hard and we have to buy our own bullets. And we said, what? Here's $100, go buy some bullets. Like, you know. But yeah, just interesting times. Different things happen, for sure.
Jules, you look at it now, and like a player will complain if there's like not enough pressure in the new can of balls that they bring out for practice and things like that. And he's well with the what was it again? The guerrilla militia.
The Shining Path.
I love the what are you packing?
Yeah. Well, I thought I was Clint Eastwood, you know.
Brilliant.
So, how would you like to see the format?
I would love it to go back to the old way, home and away. Paul McNamee actually had a suggestion that maybe the Davis Cup needs to be played over 2 years, because you do want the best players playing. And the schedule is so tight now. You know, it's so packed. There's so many events, and tennis is such a rigorous athletic sport now that, you know, sometimes the top players bypass the Davis Cup, and that's a great shame. So the format, the week has to be valued in the calendar. Davis Cup has to be valued along with the slams. They're very important. You build a calendar around it. But I'm not sure that's going to happen. But I would love to see it go back to the old format. But, you know, maybe there's ways around it.
When you were playing, did you put a circle around the week that was a Davis Cup week? And that was
totally.
And tell us a little bit more about, say, Neil Fraser was actually courtside on a couch not too dissimilar.
The Jason recliner rocker. Yeah.
He actually could recline it.
You could slip back, yeah.
And there was a little radio next to him for the Saturday?
Yeah. Well, Fraser always had a little transistor because he loved a punt. And yeah, so he'd be at the back of the court, sort of leaning against the wall, and you'd think he's just casting an eye over the practice sets and, you know, determining what he likes or what he doesn't like. But he'd actually be glued to the radio, listening to the races and having a punt. But Fraser was a wonderful captain, you know, hugely instrumental in my career. I wasn't born to Davis Cup. I used to get so nervous. I was terrible. I was 2-9, 2 wins, 9 losses. Wow. Fraser kept picking me, God knows why, but I ended up with a 16-14 winning record, so I finally figured it out. Some players are born to it. Leighton Hewitt, born to it, just thrived and grew. You know, Pat, not so much. You know, he had to work at it. You know, Pat was
Rafa.
Pat Cash was born to it. Rafa was quite, you know, an intense individual and very analytical, and, you know, sometimes he played with the weight of the world on his shoulders in Davis Cup, but obviously, you know, produced some fantastic results too.
Is that purely because it's that team environment? You're not just doing it for yourself, it's everyone else?
Yeah, very much so. And I don't know, pressure's usually imagined. You know, you put pressure on yourself, but just, you know, as a kid, my coach had coached Rod Laver, and my first memories of tennis are watching like a 1973 Davis Cup match where Laver and Newcombe were playing in Kooyong against the Czechs. And I think that year they won it, and the final consisted of Laver, Newcombe and Rosewell in the one team.
Oh, wow.
Pretty extraordinary. I think it was 1973. So there was just this amazing history, and you felt like you were going to step up into that history and be that player, and it's crushing when it doesn't quite play. And this is what I get back to, those emerging players. Some players are born to it, some are not. Some have to work a little harder for it.
Just on a couple of players that when you went into, so you went Davis Cup coach, you let Fitzy be the captain and take all the heat when things didn't go well, right. And then you chime in with the glory when things go well.
Very much so. You've picked it in one.
Yeah. Smart man.
You became captain for a couple of years a bit later on, but just in that generation where you and Fitzy took over, you actually won one in 2003.
Lost one in 2001.
Oh, you can touch on that if you want, with Rafa, Hewitt. Philippoussis came back. So you think of Mark Philippoussis, and I remember it clearly, late 90s, he was maligned because it was like, does this guy really care about Australian tennis because he's not committing himself all the time to Davis Cup? But that against Spain in 2003 was pretty amazing on a couple of levels, wasn't it?
Oh, it was. Look, misunderstood. Much maligned, Mark, but misunderstood. I mean, you got to remember too, he won a Davis Cup final in France in the late 90s, down in Nice. And he was a giant on the clay. That's hard to do for an Australian. He was an amazing player for Australia. And, just a little aside, when he won that final match against Spain to win us the Davis Cup, he actually, at the back end of the fourth set, he tore his pec.
Oh.
So you get a little breather. We went in, there was an injury timeout. He had a golf ball popped out of his chest. Like, it was torn. And Mark had so much easy power that he just kind of went within himself, played extremely accurately with a torn. I don't know how he did it, but he won that final set with a torn pec. I'll never know how he did it, but he was a giant for Australia in Davis Cup. Absolutely.
Good piss up after.
I think so. I can't remember. Well, we talk about that Brazil tie because the Fanatics used to come to the ties, and it was huge in Australia, those home finals. So we'd always go and have a beer with the Fanatics. And in Brazil, we actually had a party on the beach at the hotel we were staying at in Florianopolis, and the Fanatics all bust out. The hotel owner put on a massive smorgasbord. The Fanatics were there. And I can distinctly remember Rafa playing tackle footy with the Fanatics, and a bonfire was one of the goalposts. And Pat was giving as good as he got. These things may not happen now, but they were good fun back in the day.
They should happen.
Yeah.
Jules,
they should happen. That sounds good to me. Well, you've touched on some of the big players, but obviously this Davis Cup, Rafael Nadal, the 22-time Grand Slam champ, retiring. I don't even know how we describe the Big Four era, the Rafa era.
How do you? Like, when I started out, Borg was doing his thing, and Sampras won a few more, and you look at that and you go, can't be repeated. Then Federer wins his 7 Wimbledons, can't be repeated, and then Novak's actually trumped them all. Like, I look at what the big three and Andy. I mean, he's yes, definitely part of the Big Four. Great player, Andy. Don't get me wrong. Just didn't quite have the racket head speed that some of those guys had, and Andy, to me, never matched his personality didn't match what his game style, where it could have taken him, in my opinion. But phenomenal player. But what they've achieved in the sport, how relentless they are, is just incredible. What they've done in this era. I used to go and watch Rafa, when I was commentating, I used to go and watch Rafa practice in the days off. Just watch him practice. And he'd get like a couple of Spanish juniors out there and he'd just bury them in his days off. And I'd just go... No one's beating this guy. No one's beating this guy on clay. And then
junior.
And I used to watch him play, and I thought, well,
he's in there actually. I think a couple of them.
Yeah, no, he would literally bury them. And then, I used to go and watch Federer had to play him a couple of times in finals, and I'd go and watch Roger practice and Rafa practice, and I'm going, there's only one winner, and the only way I could see anybody beating Rafa was just being a complete disruptor, almost like an old school Paul Annacone chip charge serve volley type of player. Would probably still lose 2-2, but on his own terms. But everyone was just losing to Rafa on his terms, because when I used to play tennis with a guy called Emilio Sanchez, who was a very good clay court Spanish player. He was involved with the Davis Cup. He said, there's this kid coming out of Spain. He said, you would not believe it, he's off the charts in the testing. speed, endurance, strength. He's going to win the French. And he actually got injured, I think, in his very first year and didn't play when he could have. And then he went on to win however many he's won. But that was Rafa. So he's just this incredible mix of, athleticism and determination. I did speak to his uncle, who was his coach, obviously, through all those formative years and through a big stage part of his career. And I had the opportunity to interview him for Tennis Australia, actually. And my final question was, so, Uncle Tony, what's Rafa's greatest attribute? And he thought about it, and he said, I thought he'd say forehand or physicality or determination, resilience. He goes, respect. He goes, Rafa has respect. He has respect for the game, the people in it, the drivers, the tournament directors. He respects the game. He'll never let it down. He respects his opponents. He doesn't like them all, but he respects them. He doesn't assume that everything is going to go well. He's willing to work for it. So I would say respect is his greatest attribute, which I thought was a tremendous answer.
Yeah, I remember the time he took on Kyrgios at Wimbledon, and there was a little bit of friction between the two camps, and you could tell that Rafa was like agitated because there wasn't that mutual. Like Nick was trying to get under his skin a bit. And,
I said disruptor.
Yeah,
Nick's a great disruptor.
Yeah,
he gets in people's heads, and he's got the game to disrupt. He doesn't allow even the very best players in the world to play their game. Nick dictates how it's going to be played. But Nick does. He's a disruptor, and that's kind of what I was talking about. How do you beat these top guys? You disrupt them.
What do you reckon about what now for Rafa? Because you talk about how invested in the sport he is. He's got this sprawling academy, which I've never been to. It sounds like a good location. It's
amazing. Apparently, I send some kids there, and
we can go if you need some bag carriers or something.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. I sent a kid there. And I rang Rafa's agent. He set it all up. And Rafa's agent, the kid called me. I said, how is he? He goes, it's unbelievable. He said, I arrived at 10 o'clock at night. And they'd sent me an email saying, what would you like to eat when you arrive? Because it's very late and you've probably missed dinner. And I rang up the agent. I said, I'm not surprised. Anything with Rafa's name on it would be this precise and this perfect. And apparently the academy's just A1.
Yeah, how good. How good.
Who has been one of your favourites in the modern era to watch?
Oh, well, it's hard to get away from the players we've just talked about, the big four. I actually really enjoyed Andy because I don't understand Rafa's forehand. I can't understand. I get Roger's game; it's sublime. But I actually really enjoyed Andy because you could see what he was doing. It was like chess. Because he couldn't kind of just pump winners. He was a bit old school in the sense that he was fairly linear. He didn't have a lot of racket head speed. But I actually really enjoyed watching Andy play. But in awe, obviously, of Roger when he was at his best. Sometimes when I watched Roger play, I would think, why did I bother? Like, why bother? Like, really? This is just tennis at another level. And, of course, he was just the supreme stylist.
Yeah.
So beautiful to watch. I always felt Roger didn't explore his net game as much as he should have. And that's why I kind of get pretty enthusiastic about Carlos Alcaraz because he's not afraid to come in and take advantage of his tremendous ground shots. You can't get to the net in the same way as you used to. But when your ground shots are that good, you can get to the net and you can close points out and you can win points in different ways. So I always felt like Roger didn't kind of explore that dimension because he was so good in every other department.
What about in the women's game?
I really love Ash.
Yeah.
And who I like is this Karolina Muchova. Did I say that right?
Mm-hmm.
And the reason I like them is because they have a point of difference. They play an all-court game. You can kind of see what they're doing to try to dissect their opponent. Because there's a lot of one-dimensional tennis played in the women's game, and it's spectacular. But if one of the great things about tennis is the contrast in styles. Rafa v. Roger, Borg v. McEnroe. And obviously when Ash played, you got that great contrast in styles. And Muchova had an incredible run at the French Open one year. And I just really enjoyed the all-court tennis. But what impresses me most is the athleticism of the modern player. People compare eras. You can't really.
You can't,
it's a different game. I think we've got an old wooden racket on set here somewhere.
Oh,
like
of course we do.
Try putting that in. Try putting Pete Sampras's racket in the hand of a modern player. They would. It's a club, like
heavy.
Cavemen could have, hunted woolly mammoth with that racket. It was 400 grams.
Descriptive.
Stiff. Graphite. Incredibly tight. Narrow string pattern, and Pete had a serve that was the best of all time. So the game, it's, as I say, it is a bit hard to compare the eras, but what gets me most now is just the athleticism. The height, the size, the athleticism of the players is, really quite something.
Yeah, you look at the athleticism of a Coco Gauff, and it's incredible.
But even look at like a Marin Cilic. There's a guy who's like 6'6", maybe 6'7". He's all arms and legs, but geez, he moves well, and that just didn't happen in my day.
With the two top guys at the moment then, Sinner and Alcaraz, we're set up for a fantastic rivalry. Hopefully a third one jumps out, because I reckon if you have 3 or 4 going for the top of the mountain, it brings out the absolute best in everyone. But Sinner, Darren Cahill, good mate of yours, so good that he calls him Blockhead. Darren Cahill calls Wally Blockhead.
I won't tell you what I call Darren.
We actually can't say it, even though we can put the explicit rating on this, but it's too beyond that as well. But why does Cahill have such success with these top guys in just adding some finishing touches to what is a pretty good base with a guy like Andre Agassi and then a guy like Yannick Sinner?
It's a good question, Adam, and I think sometimes there's the technical aspects, there's the tactical aspects, but Darren just has a way about him. I think he's a great man manager. He's very loyal. He's very trustworthy. He's very open and honest. There's just something about his personality that gels. Players trust him. They believe in him. They believe in the message. He's very good at all that tactical stuff, don't get me wrong. He had a couple of great mentors. His father was a tremendous coach in the SAFL.
Footy, yeah.
Yeah, Port Adelaide.
John Cahill.
Very successful, that's right. And, a lot of man management goes into that style of coaching. And then Darren had a coach by the name of Bob Carmichael as a player. Now, Bob was a throwback to another era, one of the best personalities in Australian tennis, just a tremendous man. And I think Darren has just taken a little bit of, Neil Fraser, he's Davis Cup captain. He's just taken a little bit from a lot of the people that have mentored him and been involved in his playing career. And he's just kind of combined it and gelled it beautifully to connect with the players and then have, it's not a front. He has all the acumen behind him, the technical and the tactical stuff to make them better.
You've touched on disruptor. You've touched on personality. You've even mentioned his name. Nick Kyrgios. It'll be great to see him back. What are your thoughts on his future?
Yeah, I'm curious about Kyrgios. 2 years out of the game is a long time. And he did have wrist surgery. Surgeries are not great, obviously. So I'm curious because for a lot of players, I think that would be extremely difficult to come back and play well because we just assume that great players are great. But if you have a look at the big four, have a look at their year and how much tennis they played when they're at their very best. Look at Leighton and Pat when they had those great results. Have a look at how much tennis the volume of matches they had going in. So you're sort of playing at this subconscious level. There's no anxiety. It's 30-40. You just do.
Yeah.
You don't think, you just do. How does that work for Nick? Well, that's what I'm curious to see because he's a little bit different in that he has such a game that, as I said, he can kind of take the opponent out of the equation a little bit. It's on his terms. So it's a different dynamic, and anybody who serves that well is going to be dangerous in any case, any time. But the big question comes down to, is the volume of training there, on and off the court? If that's there, will he be in pretty good stead? But we might be a little bit premature to think that we would see the very best of him in January. It would probably take until about September to see the very best of him if there's a full season. Before he gets to say 30-40 or Deuce, and you get to Deuce and you spell it wrong, it doesn't even matter. You just move on like we have. That's right. Yeah. Exactly. Oh. Yeah. Oh, I thought that was like Deus or,
I like that you waited that long.
Yeah.
That's me. So I did that.
So you were dyslexic?
Yeah, apparently.
Someone in here is.
No.
Yeah.
I'll take it. No.
I think you got to keep it.
No, producer Hugo's trying to claim that. I'll claim that. That was my fault. So,
One job,
sorry about
mate.
that, everyone.
One job.
I didn't even notice. Yeah.
Anyway, we move on, don't we, Jules?
We move on. Tennis. We were talking about this before you sat down on the lounge. Tennis takes you to many places in the world, and it introduces you to many people in the world, I would imagine. Have you got some good memories about people you met along the way?
Yeah. Well, strangely enough, I met the Pope.
Yes. Actually, I think we've got a photo. Oh, there we go. So if you're listening
That's
to us...
That's the Pope on the right.
If you're listening to us, we have a very dapper looking Wally there.
You would say that's a mullet, wouldn't you?
A left.
No, you wouldn't almost say it. You would say it.
You would say a dark mullet, a photographer in the middle, shaking hands with the Pope at the right of the screen.
So that came, which is interesting because I'm an atheist.
Did you tell him that?
I had no religious instruction whatsoever. I barely stepped a foot inside a church. But what they did at the Italian Open is they grabbed a couple of players from each continent to go and see the Pope. So there's about 8 or 10 of us. But it was amazing. We got like this private audience with the Pope. We went through the Sistine Chapel. Normally there's enormous crowds, as you can imagine. So it's a pretty incredible experience. But yeah, that was certainly different. We had a quick chat. I can't remember necessarily what was spoken about, but that was the Polish Pope, I think, Pope John Paul. John Paul.
So you didn't bring up the fact that you actually didn't believe in a higher being.
No. Well, when you haven't had any religious instruction as a kid, it's all very strange.
Yes,
religion, organised religion. But hey, chance to meet the Pope. But
anyone else, rock stars and things like that?
Well, I had a strange moment at San Francisco one year. I'd beaten Jimmy Connors in the semis. I actually lost to Darren Cayley in the final, and I went and stayed with Darren the next week at his condo in Tampa, and he had gotten a VHS of the match, and he had it playing on a loop the whole time. So I would get up in the morning, I'd say, "Can I turn it off?" But every time I turned it off, he'd have it back on. So he just sort of reminding me of that moment. But I'd beaten Jimmy, and Jimmy was awesome. I loved Jimmy Connors. He was just the ultimate competitor. But he was aging, and I got him. He was at the back end of his career, and I was in the press conference, and there was he was dressed, in an orthodox fashion for a tennis journalist. He had like a leather vest on and beads and little fez cap, and he was just pumping me with questions. And I thought, who's this guy writing for? And anyway, the interview was over, and he came up to me, we started talking, and he had a sort of a Spanish accent, and I was a bit like, "Mate, who do you write for?" He goes, "I'm not a journalist." And I said, "Oh, well, what do you do?" And sort of looking at his badge, and he had an Access All Areas, and it said Carlos Santana. And I said, "Are you, what, Carlos Santana, like guitar?" He goes, "Yeah, Carlos, I'm Carlos Santana." And I was like, "Mate, what are you doing here?" And he goes, "I love tennis." And Barry Mackay, the tournament director, had just given him an access. He was everywhere. He was all over the place, but he was really enthusiastic, and that was a weird interview, but hey.
Voted by Rolling Stone as the 11th greatest guitarist of all time.
Yeah, and a tremendous tennis journalist.
What did you reach in the world? Did you
in terms of guitar?
11? No, in terms of tennis ranking.
No,
did
you
you outdo Carlos?
I got to 15, but I always say that's a moment in time. I was, I reckon I bounced around. I got to 15, but most of the time I bounced around between, say, 25 and 40. You got to get rid of your first 2 years because they're rubbish, and your last 2 years are rubbish. You do some really bad things in the last couple of years of your career because you're just fried. Some days you wake up and you wonder if you ever played the game at all, and then you do some embarrassing things on court because you just don't want to be there.
There is a moment where he actually pulled the microphones, the umpire's microphone out of the chair at the US Open.
Well, he told me, and this gets back to that Camus quote. You can't. I don't like to stand in moral judgment of anybody, because you kind of got to look at yourself first. And I did actually pull the microphone off the chair because it was a very tense moment, and I got a really bad call, or so I thought. And I was trying to argue my case politely to the umpire, and he told me to stop talking. And I was a bit like, "What? Stop talking?" And I grabbed it and threw it, and I said, "You stop talking." Which
that went well.
But what actually happened was I threw it into the ground, and the bloody thing bounced. The microphone went poof, and bounced up into the crowd. I thought, "Oh no, I'm deeped." But a guy caught it. And that was an interesting match because I was actually down 5-love in the fifth, and I won it, which got me to the quarters of the US Open, which got me into the Grand Slam Cup. So that's why there was tension.
Yeah.
And what do you say after you've removed the microphone, after you've told a very important person in the match where to be quiet? Do you say thank you at the end?
I was never big on shaking I would always acknowledge the umpire, but I never shook their hand. I don't know why. Now everyone does. But I was generally good. But you have moments of insanity.
He's got a temper.
Yeah.
He does have a temper deep underneath that philosophical veneer.
That match in Peru where they threw coins at me, that was if I lost that, we were out of the world group for the first time in the history of Australia's Davis Cup. So there was genuine tension. And I'm getting hit with coins. I'm up 4-1 in the fourth. And I get hit in the face, racket, ting, ting. I was like, man, this is crazy. And I really wanted to deck somebody because it was frustrating. And I ended up winning. And I was sitting here. Fraser was there, but there was a big glass table in between us. So when the match was over, I won it. But I was just like, this is unbelievable. And people are like throwing plastic cushion covers at me. And I'm like, what? and I got my racket and I buried it into the glass. And the glass went...
Shut up.
It was like slow motion. I just thought, whoa, okay. It went down, and then it just went... The glass exploded everywhere, and the crowd went ape. Like, they were throwing Coke cans at me, and then they had a militia there, and they put their rifles over our head, and we scampered into the locker room for about 2 hours.
How good. But back to, though, when things are going well on a tennis court, did you find, and this is to the point about meeting people and celebrity and such, the better the result you had was open more doors to doors that you didn't think existed when you started playing tennis?
Yeah, look, I don't know. I mean, everyone's got a really different sort of personality. I think in a lot of ways, I just grew up in suburban Canberra. I've got pretty simple pleasures. I'm not that interested in fame or celebrity or any of the trappings of all of that. I look at someone like a Richard Fromberg, who just an amazing Davis Cup player, an amazing player. He doesn't get a lot of credit for how good he was because he was so sort of humble and introverted. But everyone's got different personalities. Some people are really flashy. They're extroverts and they kind of enjoy everything that comes with success. But, look, I judge success in tennis as, to me, if you win, people say, oh, Wally Masur, 50, this, that, and the other. If you win a slam, you're a player. That's, to me, the benchmark of... and that's why I always value Davis Cup, because it's over 5 sets, home and away, So if you win a slam, you're a player.
If you win the Hong Kong Open.
The rest of us, we're kind of making up the numbers, and we have our moments. And if those best players are not at their best, hey, you can get them. Yeah. But we're journeymen.
I would like to bring up another picture, if we could, and ask you what door you opened to get to this.
Oh, yes.
So here we have, again, if you're listening, geez, you're looking good.
That's cultural appropriation.
The rig is out. We've got some shorts on.
That is a very good
Well, lucky I've
rig.
got the shorts
That
on.
is a great rig. And you are holding what appears to be a giant tennis racket. However, I don't think it is.
I think...
Is it a pretzel?
I don't know how this came about, but this is in Paris, practice day. Shirt off, for obvious reasons.
Yeah. I mean, I can see that.
I wouldn't own a shirt if
Because it was hot. It was hot. But I think that's like a baguette or a pretzel.
I think it's a pretzel.
And I think when in France,
in
boulangerie, patisserie, I think, I don't know how it came about.
I don't know what I'm thinking when I'm looking at it.
It's odd, isn't it? It's odd.
If someone at some point in my life handed me a pretzel that size in that shape, I'd remember clearly what happened and what happened to the pretzel. But I'm looking at you and I think it's all... we're bringing up something that you don't know happened.
But I don't know why someone would have a pretzel on the back court of Roland Garros, to be honest. But
why not?
I seem to have grabbed it.
I wonder what happened to the pretzel.
I dare not think.
Best Grand Slam to visit now that you've experienced them all as just a general punter that,
they're special, aren't they? You've been to them all. They're special in different ways. In a weird way, I probably enjoy... Well, they're all special, don't get me wrong. They've just got their flavour in the city. They sort of reflect the personality of the city. But I actually love going back to the French as a commentator because, working with players, when you watch tennis on clay, you got to work hard for your points. You got to have a shot tolerance. You got to be resilient. You got to stay out there for a long time. You got to find different ways to win points. And I really enjoyed, because basically tennis now, the clay courters dominate, and once they translate their movement from clay to the movement of a hard court, for example, their game just transitions accordingly. So clay to me is kind of where it's at. So I really, from a technical, tactical point of view, I really enjoyed clay, but I never enjoyed Paris as a player. It's a little chaotic. It wasn't, like getting to England, obviously, in the US Open, Australia, you speak English, it's easy. Paris was always a little inconvenient. The clay never suited the Australians. But as I got older, I just got Paris, I got France. I loved the city, and I used to really enjoy watching the tennis on clay. So, yeah, I'd probably say Paris was almost the most fun to go back to.
What about the language? Have you picked up some of the language?
No. I got a bit of German, because of the Austrian ancestry. But no, languages is not one of my strengths.
Yeah, but he does. As I said, he quotes Camus, and I swear to God, one day at Wimbledon, just before we went on air, he gets up and he goes, guys, I've got to tell you something. We thought, oh, okay, well, he has to go home early, or he's going to put on a barbecue for us that night. And he goes, I just want to read you one thing. And he goes, even in the depths of winter, there lay inside me an invincible summer.
Well, what had
Keep
happened,
that with you,
Julie? What had happened was I was working with Peacock and a variety of people, and they were up one day, down the next, and sometimes you just got to lift the team. and I just wanted to kind of, but Peacock in particular is a bit of a manic depressive. I just had to give him a lift, get him up for the moment.
Well, thank you for giving us all a lift today. You've helped us correct our spelling over there. We'll talk to the graphics department. You've lifted AP up. I can see how inspired
his career's definitely gone downhill since he worked with me. But it's the kiss of death
on this couch again. It's going back up.
Just quickly before we go, my first coaching gig was Michael Stick. So I'd had a good back end of my career, and when I retired, Michael, we knew each other, and Michael was at the back end of his career and he was struggling. So I went to coach him. 10 months later, he was retired. So I have this ability.
So it's been great to have you here on the first episode of Deuce. This might be it for us.
Actually, yes.
Thanks, Wal.
One and only.
Thanks, Wal. Thanks for coming in.
Thank you.
Lovely to see you. Well, there you have it, AP, the great Ian Walter Masur.
Ian to all now. Ian to all. Looking forward to this week, the Davis Cup. Obviously, it's in the middle of the night over in Spain, but we'll be waking up each morning, if not staying up overnight to watch it. So, Spain are the favourites. As we sit here right now, Nadal's not confirmed to play, but it's a miracle if he doesn't, given the fanfare around it all. He's got Alcaraz there. They've got one of the best doubles players in their team as well. I can't see how they don't go all the way to the final. The Aussies, I'm thinking they're a sneaky chance. I mean, Leighton's got this uncanny knack of getting the absolute most out of this team. Poprin's had a great year. Jordan Thompson, who is hopefully going to join us on this very couch in a couple of weeks' time when he's back in Australia, he's there. And then, as we sit here right now, we don't know if Alex de Minaur is going to play, but if he does, that's a huge boost. Jordan Thompson's had a great doubles year with Max Purcell. Matt Ebden, they've got 3 of the top 10 doubles players in the world right now, Australia. So that's going to count for something if we can push these ties to the third and deciding. So, Australia, a sneaky little chance, and hopefully we'll get rid of the Yanks first up.
It'd be nice to see the Aussies do well, but who would have thought we'd finally see the day that Rafa calls time on his remarkable career?
I think it's about 5 or 6 years after a lot of people thought it was going to happen. I don't know how it was drawn out for so long, but he obviously has done everything he can, and eventually he's realised he has to stop. And a bit like Roger Federer a few years ago at the Laver Cup, he gets that goodbye.
Yeah.
We think, unless something untoward happens in the next. But Rafa's the type of person that if he's not 100%, he won't put himself in the position to go out for the exhibition.
Yeah, he's the team player, isn't he?
He's the team player. So hopefully he gets that farewell, even if it's in a doubles match. That people, especially in Spain, and there's a few things happening in Spain, obviously, with some tragedy with what happened in Valencia with the floods, and Malaga's had a lot of rain as well, that it just lifts people's spirits. And he's a god over there. He's an icon. So, yeah, goodbye, Rafa, this weekend.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think that was a great way to kick off our series here at the clubhouse on Deuce. Who have you got lined up next week? Because you've got your little black book out. You've been making some calls.
Jelena Dokic is going to join us. So
wow.
Jelena's, obviously, she's got the feature-length movie out at the moment, but we'll reflect on that, obviously, because it's a story that resonates outside tennis, not just within tennis. But also, I want to pick Jelena's brains about how she sees the state of tennis at the moment, especially the women's game. Here in Australia, when Ash retired, it was like, oh, damn, Ash, can you keep on playing? But there's some brilliant tennis players emerging as well. So I want Jelena's thoughts on the state of play.
And she's really shining in her role as a commentator now as well. She's doing very well behind the mic.
Yeah, she's preparing, and she does prepare heavy for the summer of tennis. So she'll commentate all throughout Australia across the summer of tennis. So looking forward to her thoughts on what she reckons is going to happen when the weather gets hot and the tennis comes here.
You can track us down on social media, Instagram and Facebook at The Fanatics. You can also find us on YouTube's Fanatics YouTubes, plural. You can find a couple of YouTubes, Fanatics TV.
A couple over here with Elle.
There's so many things distracting me in the clubhouse. I can't help it. And anywhere that you get your good podcast from, stay with us here in the clubhouse. Heaps more coming up throughout the summer. Tennis.
Yes. Well, the good news is we'll be back for a second episode, and that's the main thing, Jules.
If we'll be back for a third is to be decided.
We'll see. No,
Lovely to see you, AP.
You too. So there you have it. That is Deuce. Now, don't forget, if you enjoyed what you've seen here on Fanatics TV, give us a like if you can. Hit the like button. Also, subscribe It's somewhere down there. And importantly, tell your mates. Grow the clubhouse. We want all in.